So not acknowledging any of the history around the Homestead Act or the racial wealth gap or current median income or discriminatory practices is just ludicrous and not being honest.
And not only that, and I'm going to come back to the Homestead Act because I want to play what MLK had to say about that. He talked about surviving poll tax. Literally, the day before, the Republican right-wing Supreme Court refused to hear the emergency appeal of the state of Alabama, who literally was trying to destroy black representation by not creating a second congressional district.
In this video, Roland Martin exposes Tim Scott's blatant hypocrisy live on air. So Roland doesn't just push back lightly here. He digs into history, data, and even Scott's own background to show how absurd it is to deny systematic racism. From the Homestead Act to today's racial wealth gap, Martin lays out why brushing off centuries of policy-driven inequality isn't just dishonest, it's straight up dangerous. And when Scott just parrots right-wing talking points about how America has moved past racism, Ron just calls him out with receipts that are impossible to ignore. So make sure to watch till the end to see how Ron Martin exposes Tim Scott's blatant hypocrisy live on air.
The day before. And so when Tim Scott stands there and acts as if we still are not dealing with the after effects of white folks trying to deny the right to vote, as if, oh, we survived that. Bruh, we were dealing with it the day before the debate.
Yes, yes. And the thing that's also not interesting, when he said racism is gone, there was a study just came out in November by the Pew Research Center that said 2/3 of America believes that racism still exists. And that included Democrats and Republicans. They may disagree on how racism plays itself out, but people believe racism still exists. Now, the other 30% of people who don't agree with that or whatever it is, the 35%, that's a whole nother, that's where it looks like Senator Scott's in that pool. But there is valid evidence that shows people believe it's there. They may not believe it's structural. They may believe it's individual, but racism is existing. And racism is in the soil of America, whether we want to admit that or not.
Well, I think part of the deal here is that Tim Scott is sort of thinking and operating like many white Christians in this country. Anthony, go to my iPad. This is what you were talking about. Pew, white Christians say too many see racism when it's not there. New poll finds. So that poll you're talking about, other folk are saying, no, we see racism. Tim Scott is staying with those same white evangelical Christians, right wing, who say, we don't see it.
Well, they don't feel it. It's not happening to them. So that's why they don't feel it, but it's there. And people know it's there. I mean, we don't want to admit that how this country was defined, how this country's been built on the backs of people who were black or were enslaved. And they don't want to admit that we've had to have constitutional laws to make people full citizens. And it still is a consistent issue of concern for people who live particularly in the South, but all over America. Even in Wisconsin, this issue of having to have your ID to go vote is a real issue of looking at a poll tax in a different way. It's still a poll. It still has the tenets of what a poll tax is, because not everybody has a driver's license, particularly when you're in a state like Wisconsin, where you have the highest level of black male incarceration. And oftentimes it's hard to get that driver's license, to get your ID, to be able to vote.
So Ron Martin goes straight at Tim here, and honestly, he's spot on. Tim's just sitting there saying we've survived racism while voter suppression is still happening is just absurd. Ron reminds everyone that literally the day before the debate, Alabama Republicans were trying to block black representation by refusing to create a second majority black district. That's not ancient history, that's the present. And here's the kicker. Even the data backs Roland up. A Pew Research study from November showed 2/3 of Americans, Democrats and Republicans alike, still believe racism exists. They may disagree on how it plays out, but they acknowledge reality. Tim Scott, though, he's in that minority bubble pretending it's gone somehow.
So there's various other ways that are not always as visible, but they
Yep.
still are providing the same practice of, I do not see you as my equal.
Yep.
I see you as less than, and I support that in whatever way that maintains my position of superiority.
You mentioned MLK, you mentioned the Homestead Act, and this is the MLK Republicans are never going to repeat. They love talking about conscience of character and all that sort of stuff, but you're never going to hear them play this MLK quote at any of their events. I find it interesting, Doc. You heard MLK in that very speech there talk about land grant colleges and universities. Next Tuesday in Tennessee, the students there are going to be holding, I'm going to show it in a second, students there are going to be holding an event, a town hall there, demanding the billions of dollars that they are owed. The Biden administration sent letters, Cardona and Vilsack sent letters to various states saying $13 billion is owed to HBCUs who were shorted over the years land grant money. Go to my iPad. This is the rally at Tennessee State is going to be having on Tuesday, October 3rd, 2023. So here you have Senator Tim Scott of South Carolina standing there talking about how we survived, and here we are in 2023 still talking about those very institutions MLK mentioned, those land grant schools being deprived of $13 billion, but on the end, Tim Scott saying, oh, there's no racism in America. Well, Tim, how is it the black colleges didn't get the same money as the white schools?
So Tim's just trying to wave off racism as if it's somehow all in the past. But Roland just isn't having it. Tim Scott's whole framing, I don't see you as my equal, I see you as less than, really just shows how deeply this mindset still runs. It's not always loud or obvious, but it shapes policy and outcomes all the same. And then Roland just flips the script completely with that MLK clip. And man, it's just brutal. MLK lays out in plain terms how the US government gave white immigrants millions of acres of land, built schools for them, provided subsidies, and mechanization loans, basically everything needed to create generational wealth. Meanwhile, black Americans were just left empty handed and told to lift themselves up by their bootstraps. That's the origin of the racial wealth gap Scott pretends doesn't exist.
You know, the issue here is that if we maintain an anti-black way of life, which is very prominent in society, we're never going to, no one's going to, we're not going to receive the same level of respect, the same level of support. You know, it just is all about this whole idea that meritocracy is the basis for how everything works. But not everybody is given the same level of access or the same level of privilege to be able to maintain and get to what we consider the American dream, but also the level of well-being that they deserve. Because we have to admit there's a discomfort with blackness, and so many studies have just brought that up more recently. Studies by William Darity, by Derek Hamilton, by Trina Shanks, all well-known scholars, and even Raj Chetty most recently did a study out of Harvard where he looked at people who had the same income, high incomes, who are black and brown and white. Still, you will find that there's discriminatory practices that do not allow for those who are black and brown to still maintain the same level of parity as their white counterparts. We have a discomfort with blackness, and that needs to be acknowledged, and that's not what's being talked about.
And there are black people who have a discomfort with blackness, who are trying to appease and make certain white folks comfortable, and that's literally what Senator Tim Scott was doing. Go to my iPad. This is from the InsideHigherEd.com, and this is from their story last week on HBCUs being underfunded. And so here's what I find to be interesting right here, Doc. If you look at this chart right here, when they broke down the analysis, Tennessee, $2.1 billion, North Carolina, $2 billion, Florida, $1.9 billion, Texas, $1.1 billion, West Virginia, $852 million, Georgia, $603 million, Alabama, $527,000. Boom, Doc. South Carolina, $469.9 million. So one of the two senators from South Carolina stands before Republicans and says there's no racism. Black people survived slavery. We didn't really survive LBJ's The Great Society. Yet the man then says, oh, ain't no racism in America, and his own state HBCUs right here are owed $470 million.
Yes. You know, I think often people do not take in, well, one, I think people don't critically think enough. That's a real issue that I'm concerned about. But also, I think people don't, they think of racism as I treated you badly, or I hit you, or they think of slavery as racism. They don't think of practices that are structural, that makes it difficult for those who are socially constructed as black or brown, or Latino, however people define themselves, as being, and also they are put into this category of being undeserving, which has been a reality for people since people were brought to this soil as enslaved people, and denied the same privileges. And we see it a lot with, even more recently, with immigration practices directed at those who identify as Mexican. We don't want to admit that we don't provide those same opportunities, and that we don't want to admit historically the social networks that other people have been able to have with the Homestead Act, looking at the GI Bill, looking at redlining, looking at median income. Median income right now for blacks is $52,000 compared to whites is $75,000. And we've seen that historically, that those who are black have always been in a space where they have not had the same amount of income. We're not even talking about wealth, just basic income. Black people are getting paid 74 cents on the dollar to their white counterparts for the exact same job. So either we have decided that those who are black are lazy, or they don't have the same mental capacity, and that's not true. When he brought up the whole idea that fathers are not involved, black fathers were documented as being the most involved fathers by the federal government. They did their own study and proves that. So again, the devil's in the details, and read your history book. Read your own data that comes out of the government which you represent.
Oh, but Dr. Pate, hold up. How about read your own history? Tim Scott's daddy divorced his mama.
Oh.
Tim Scott's daddy divorced his mama, and he has talked about how his mama raised him and his brother as a working class poor woman. Go to my iPad. This is literally from Senator Tim Scott's own Facebook page. Listen.
Senator has written a new op-ed published today in the Washington Post. It's titled, "Abortion is Not the Way to Help Single Black Mothers." Senator Scott joins me now in an exclusive interview in Focus. First of all, welcome.
Thank you very much.
And I want to know what went through your mind as she was saying those words. Translate what you heard and why you felt, because it was very uncharacteristic to see you at times just lean in so hard. Why'd you feel like you needed to do it?
I was compelled to do so, to be honest with you. I could not believe my ears. She was responding to a question, so it was completely unprepared, unfiltered, and her response was to, in my opinion, provide a calloused approach and a solution, a remedy for blacks living in poverty, being abortion. And as a guy who was raised by a powerful, positive black woman in poverty, in a single-parent household, I know that sometimes broken places is where you find brilliance. I know that sometimes hard work and dedication...
Right there. So right there.
And wrapping this up, Roland's hit really just sticks here. Tim just keeps denying systemic racism while standing on a personal story that literally proves its existence. He talks about being raised by a single black mother in poverty, but instead of connecting that reality to the larger structural barriers black families still face, he flips it into a Republican talking point. That's not strength, that's just pandering. Roland calling out Scott's own family history wasn't petty. It was a way of saying you know better. Because at the end of the day, the facts, the history, the underfunded HBCUs, and even his own lived experience all contradict the line he's selling. Scott doesn't believe in receipts. He just brings distraction. Ron brings facts, and that's why it's so obvious when one side is leaning on bias to make inequality sound like a choice, and the other side is showing exactly why that bias still shapes opportunity today. And speaking of bias, are you getting tired of getting news from biased news sources? One outlet says one thing and another says the complete opposite? How are you supposed to know what's actually true? That's where ground news comes in. It lets you compare how different media outlets, whether it's left, right, or center, are covering the same story. so you can see the full picture instead of just the echo chamber. And here's the best part. Click the link in the description and get a 40% off the Vantage tier, which gives you even deeper insights in media bias and political trends. So stay informed, think for yourself, and check out ground news in the description down below.